Good afternoon, everybody. This is Eugene Tam from Chryseos Health, and today I have with me my wife Dawn
Hello.
Wong, and also our guest for today, Benedict Eoon.
Hi.
I just want to give a short introduction of Benedict. Benedict is Associate Director of Covenant Chambers, and Benedict is a lawyer who has experience in areas such as civil and commercial litigation, as well as family law. I don't know how he juggled all of that. But having read his CV on his website is very impressive. Besides being a top scorer at the O levels, and having gone through very good junior colleges, and also has a double bachelor's. I'm extremely impressed when I read it. So it is wonderful for us, privilege for us also, I think, to have for him to come and share his expertise with us this afternoon, Friday, 25th of September. So Benedict, would you like to tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks Eugene for the kind introduction and for inviting me to share some of my thoughts. It's my privilege as well to be able to give some insights and share a little bit about what I know, so that hopefully it will be helpful for those who are interested in this topic. I think Eugene has done a wonderful job at introducing me. I don't have much to add, except to say that yeah, I mean, I do have a diverse practice, and I think the benefit of having that diverse practice is having seen different cases from the different perspectives. Because of course, when you see a case from a civil perspective, from a family law perspective, from a criminal law perspective, you get a different lens when you look at a certain situation. So hopefully that would be of use as we explore some of the issues today. So back to you, Eugene.
Wow, thanks you're always so very humble and nice. Thanks, bro. Today we will be sharing about how somebody coping with mental illness can better manage their legal matters, their financial matters, and as well as it is also good for caregivers to know, right? Especially in a situation where their loved ones is undergoing episodes of psychosis or stress. All right. So, and then also in light that nowadays society has become a little bit more challenging, right? Everybody has a smartphone, has social media, and we know that that's a way for which scammers can reach even people of not just the elderly, but somebody who has a mental illness. You know, it's very easy to fish. You know, sometimes people send an email that looks like an official email from the government or from the bank, and then send it to your loved ones. All right, and then they are going through mental challenges. You're afraid that they would get into trouble. You know, so that's why we wanted to do this interview with Benedict to find out more, you know, about how to protect your loved ones. So, Benedict, in your experience as a lawyer, what are some of the common requests you have received regarding legal protection for persons with mental illness? Please share with us.
Okay. Actually, I have encountered different kind of cases in different perspectives. Of course, one would be what some may call a vulnerable person who may be vulnerable to influence from, I guess, parties who may not have their best interests at heart. And I think one of the very well-known cases relating to this actually is the case of Yang Min, where there was a person, who befriended an elderly woman, and then subsequently got permission to make decisions on the woman's behalf, and made some decisions that were not in her interest. I think he was
Just
reported.
quick interruption. I remember that case was interesting because that man Yang Yi, right? Actually, he's a Chinese citizen, right? Then he
Yes,
befriended this. I mean, just for the to give the right context to the audience.
yes,
And he befriended this elderly, rich Singaporean lady,
yes,
the tour guide. He was
yes,
working as a tour guide, and she was a tourist. And then subsequently, he got very close to her, and then even to the extent of getting her to sign a LPA on to take care of the financial affairs, right?
yes.
That was how much influence he had over this lonely lady who did not have children, and her husband has passed on, so she is a widow, right? Is that the some of the context?
Yes, I think you captured the heart of it. And as a result of the misappropriation, he was actually sentenced to 9 years jail. But in this case, I guess there was some measure of legal recourse that managed to be taken against him. But there might be others out there who may not be aware of what they can do, and who may not even have the resources to be able to, I guess, commend some of the court proceedings if necessary. So this is basically one type of case that I've encountered. Another type is actually slightly
Okay,
different.
can we draw a bit longer about this case? Because
Yeah,
I remember it because I read it in the news, and it
yep,
was interesting that because this elderly lady, she did not have a family member that was in her house, but she had her servants and a driver, and and her employees in the household was witnessing that this man was shifting into the home with his family, and then they couldn't do anything, right? They were not her next of kin, so there was no authority that they had to intervene until the situation deteriorated quite severely to the extent where the niece of this elderly lady actually intervened, right?
yes. So she was the one that commenced a series of legal actions to try and revoke the tour guide's lasting power of attorney, and that is the legal document that enabled the tour guide to make decisions on behalf of the elderly woman. So if not for that niece having the resolve and I guess the resources to commence some of these court proceedings, this case may never have been exposed.
Well, I mean, it's like there may be a lot of such cases in Singapore because it may not necessarily have to be a very rich lady, elderly lady uh, with a vulnerable mental state. That could be, a lot of middle class Singaporeans, or they just nobody like would care if if nobody in the family would do anything. Is that true? You think so?
I mean, I see different kinds of cases, so it's hard to generalize. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay, well, interesting. How about the other cases that you were talking about?
Of course, on another level, there are also cases where people who may suffer from certain mental conditions actually also need to be protected from themselves, and some of these could be persons who may have some kind of mental condition that causes them to be prone to committing offenses. So I am aware of, for example, one case where there was a lady who suffered from kleptomania. So she couldn't keep that condition under control, and then repeatedly she had that urge to steal, and that meant the possibility that she'll be in and out of prison or in and out of court for committing criminal offenses. So that's
Hmm.
a different angle for some of these people who may have mental illnesses or conditions that they suffer from.
Well, this case is an interesting one. Like, what can the family do if you can't like restrain the your loved one at home, even though they may have a klepto habit?
Yeah, so this was particularly tough because the family had to set up very tight controls to make sure that someone would be with her at all times. So it's not easy actually to care for those who are not mentally well. I think not many people understand the kind of exhaustion and the kind of effort that may be required to care for someone in that situation.
Would you like have any? Do you have any clients who are mentally ill that will come to you asking for your legal advice on how they can protect themselves from getting into trouble or protecting their own assets? Uh, would you have? Do you have any such client that came and seek your help?
So very often, if someone is not mentally well, it would be someone who would come to seek the relevant advice. I mean, just because sometimes for those who have mental conditions, they may not truly understand or the condition that they are in, or they may not feel ready to want to speak to someone else. So that is not common. And also the challenge is that if the mental condition is sufficiently bad that it affects their understanding, then as a lawyer, I would also have difficulties taking instructions from the person and ascertaining whether the person can understand my legal advice. That said, though, I have acted for some of these persons. So, like I mentioned to you, the case of the lady who suffered from kleptomania, and I actually represented her in criminal proceedings. So that's the context.
Wow, so then you have first-hand experience. How about it? How about this lady's caregiver? Like, did they like come together with her to like, like you said, they may have a diminished ability to understand your instructions or your advice, and then as well they may not be able to express their own uh, understanding of the situation. So you might need their family members to help, right?
Yes. So thankfully, in that case, she had a very loving husband who
Oh,
took care of her and would assist her with the necessary. And so that's how we were able to assist her in the court proceedings.
speaking of which, is like this kind of talk among the community of people who are dealing with mental illness is somewhat lacking in Singapore, right? Like never heard of like maybe like IMH or any private psychiatric hospital in Singapore should organize talks like that for their mentally ill community. And I think all this like helps to like normalize uh, um, their lives. It's like when there's many people like discussing such topic, it just helps to remove stigma and make everybody needs legal advice, right? Who doesn't, isn't it?
Yes, but if you are talking about, I guess, greater awareness of mental illness and mental issues, I think that there has been growing awareness of the need for this sector. Hence, the government trying to pass different kind of laws, and I think one of the most recent ones would be the Vulnerable Adults Act, which I think increases I guess the ability of social services to step in the necessary situation. I think government is looking at that, and maybe this is an opportune time to also get some of Dawn's thoughts on this, because Dawn, I know that you have significant experience in the social services area, and very often actually lawyers will encounter social services in the course of the work, and we have to interact with social services. So it's actually, there is some level of connection. So maybe Dawn, you can shed some light on this.
Yeah, I think, okay, I mean, I'm just speaking from my experience on the ground, because in my experience, I mean, I've handled a lot of cases where the families have very complex problems. So the mental illness actually comes together with family violence, yeah, and comes together with child abuse or child neglect, you see. So oftentimes social workers like myself, right, always wish that we had a lawyer that we could collaborate very closely with, because we may not have the very accurate legal expertise. I mean we don't have the expertise, but we don't really have the right know-how or the knowledge to offer to our clients. Yeah. Maybe I can share a little bit about some of the legal processes that we have been able to advise our clients on. Yeah, one of it is actually the personal protection order. Yeah, because for cases where there's family violence, and it could be that the spouse has a mental illness, but then the spouse doesn't seek treatment, then therefore the children and, okay, let's say the spouse is a husband, and the children and the wife are being abused. Yeah, so in these situations, then we will actually support the wife, and then, you know, explore with her whether she would want to pursue taking out a personal protection order against the husband to first establish a level of safety for herself and the children. Yeah, because sometimes the people who use violence, they actually need a certain level of control from authorities, you know. Then only after that, then therapeutic work can possibly come in to help to facilitate some kind of change. Yeah. I mean, in these kind of situations also, I have found out that, you know, some of the people who use abuse, actually, some of them really do want to change, but they don't know how to. So sometimes these levels of control, like the PPO, can actually be quite helpful to just establish a certain level of safety first. Yeah, so one example.
Sure. And Dawn, I guess while on the topic of the personal protection order, because of course as a lawyer, I see it from a legal perspective, right? Helping the client obtain an order. But what happens after that? Sometimes we may not always have the full picture. So how adequate do you think a personal protection order is, and what are some of the limitations? Because, you know, it's nice to have the order, and of course, if you breach the order, there are certain penalties that will apply. But sometimes for someone laboring with a mental condition and in the heat of the moment, how much protection does the order actually give if someone does not even fully understand the consequences and of his actions or her actions?
Yeah. No, you're right about that. You're right about that, because a lot of times as social workers, we want to facilitate reconciliation in families, but actually it is very hard to if the person who uses the abuse is not ready or not willing to change. Yeah, so actually, right, I think that the PPO is effective in the sense that it enables the person to stop the violence first. Then after that, if you want to go to the next step of reconciliation, that one, right, is really very hard to say. Because actually in a lot of situations, we do see a lot of families whereby the cases actually end up in divorce. Yeah, because the spouse that uses abuse just can't live with the children and the wife. Yeah, so it usually ends up in separation. I mean, that's how I see it. So, you know, in that sense, there is a limitation to this PPO, but yet there's also a benefit. Yeah, the limitation is that it doesn't facilitate reconciliation, but the benefit is that it establishes a certain level of safety for the vulnerable. Yeah, so that's how my experience has been. Yeah.
Sure, and I mean, just to even drill down a little bit further, I think, Dawn, you would know that applying for a PPO sometimes takes an amount of time. So from a social services perspective, what happens in the meantime, you know, as court proceedings are happening to obtain the relevant PPO?
Yeah, that's the bane of helping families in such situation, because we are very helpless too. The best that we can do is to chart out a safety plan, which means that if you detect a certain level of tension, in your relationship. For example, if you identify anger signals in the person who's going to be using the abuse, then call for a timeout. Either you leave the house, go and stay with someone, you know, or do something that separates the both of you. Yeah. But how many times can you do that, right? While you're waiting for the next court date? Yeah. So if there are children in the family, and if it really crosses the threshold whereby there's abuse to the children, then the social workers will call the Child Protective Service. Yeah. But if there are no children and there's just wife and husband, right? Usually we will just ask the wife to stay out or go somewhere else. But you know, in such situations, it's also difficult because there could be a trauma bond between the husband and the wife. Yeah, so wife may still, you know, feel like, oh, I want to forgive my husband for what he's done. And then she may just go out for a while and then she comes back again. The whole cycle of violence repeats. Yeah, so I think as a social worker looking at the situation, we also don't really know what to do lah. Yeah, just, you know, pray hard that the court date comes fast. Yeah.
Yes, I can understand that. Eugene, any more questions that you wanna throw at us?
You know, I've always like
I have a question for Benedict on this line because the PPO actually only applies in situations where there are family ties, right? So if let's say a girlfriend, you know, is dating a man who has who have aggression as a result of mental illness, then what kind of law can she invoke, you know, to protect herself? Because she doesn't qualify for a PPO.
I believe that there are other kinds of protection orders which can apply even for non-family members. Yeah, so
Okay.
that might be something that the person can consider.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and of course, an even quicker way is to just call the police, right? And
yeah, but you know, I have families that have called the police a lot, but you know, each time the police comes in and then you just stop it at that point, and then the whole cycle of violence repeats. So it's kind of like a very helpless situation.
But often I would say that the legal remedy, I mean, because it takes time and it incurs costs, actually there are a lot of other practical measures that maybe should be prioritized as well. Because even if you have a relevant order, I mean, in the heat of the moment and when there is the threat of danger, I mean, the piece of paper can only protect you so much, and while there might be certain repercussions, it may not prevent you from violence, right? So I think it's always good to exercise prudence, prevention, rather than just rely on legal remedies.
That's why we need the kampong spirit. Where is the kampong head?
Oh, that's very true. We really need the kampong spirit, because without that informal support network and the community agencies to help, right? Actually, there are a lot of vulnerable persons who can't find the support that they need. Yeah, so you're right about that.
Maybe the legal system, the Ministry of Law, should start to empower neighbors and I don't know. I mean, it's hard. It's always difficult to get outsiders to be involved in a family issue. But before we continue, let's welcome Michelle. Hi, Michelle. This is Eugene Tam from Chryseos Health.
Do they really have like
Hello.
Yes,
welcome.
Michelle, if you have any questions on the legal perspective, I mean, you can feel free to ask, because this is a session where we're discussing some of this. And I don't know if this is an opportune time to also talk about the issue of wills and trusts, and making sure that that's adequately crafted so that there is a level of protection if money is eventually to be received by someone who may not be mentally well. Eugene, would you like me to share a bit more on that?
Yes, Ben, let's talk about it because yeah, we have been discussing this recently. Share your perspective about the will, about letter of wishes, and LPA.
Sure. So one aspect often for a parent who has a child who is not mentally well, they are often concerned because one, they want to make sure that the person has enough money to be able to get by, because who else is going to look after that person? But at the same time, if monies were to be given to a person who may not be mentally well, the person may not be able to handle the money. The person may end up either giving it away, squandering it, or overspending. So there are all these issues that typically a parent may be concerned about, especially if they are thinking on behalf of their child who is not mentally well. So one area that actually has been helpful is to draft some kind of trust into the will, so that even if a parent passes on and the monies need to be given, or I guess given to a child, the child being beneficiary of the will, it can be held by someone else on trust for that person. And of course, that person should be someone that the the person creating the will can trust to take care of the child who is not mentally well. So the person will actually hold on to these funds and say, okay, even though it's with me, the monies are with me, but it's actually all for the benefit of this other person. And the person crafting the will can also put in place certain clauses to give directions to the trustee, so that the trustee can carry out some of these instructions as much as possible in deciding when and how much to give monies to children who are not mentally well.
Yeah, I think that's very important because, like me, we have been talking about how there's so many online scams nowadays, phishing emails. Not only that, there are, yeah, it's with the internet, yeah, it's just so easy to deceive, right? And of course, we just now we were before Michelle joined us, we were talking about the Yang Yi, the tour guide, that tour guide that got himself into the a kind of relationship with a vulnerable rich widow, and then after that started to siphon off her assets, and even move his whole family into the household. And I think most parents or caregiver or loved ones who are caring for somebody with mental illness wouldn't want that to happen to their loved ones, or to see their assets being wasted, all right, in such a way. You probably rather to donate it to charity. And yeah, I think when Benedict is sharing this point, uh, most people will know about the will, but not many people will go and set up a trust, because most people think that trust is for a very rich family, right? Run by family offices with investment managers, and they are looking at huge assets, like multi-million-dollar assets. You know, uh, does the cost trust does the trust cost that kind of money, or is it for only very rich people?
No, there are all sorts of trust, right? And of course, if you are a person of means and you can pay for a company to take care of the trust, that's something that some people prefer, especially if they can't find someone that they trust. And often some of these officers, they may also have some ability to invest the funds and to grow the funds, and they may also have the connections and the resources to find the relevant investments. But there can be other forms of trust as well, where perhaps a family member is a trustee for another family member, and that's a much simpler mechanism and also a workable mechanism, especially if we're talking about the context of someone that's not mentally well. It can be quite costly to pay for a trust company. So it's a very cost-effective approach to get a family member.
Since we're at this topic, right, like how much does it cost to like set up the will and the trust? Typically speaking, give us a ballpark figure.
Well, I think different law firms will charge differently. And depending on the complexity of the trust that needs to be set up, I would imagine that will drafting, you could get that done anywhere from 500 to 1,000, depending on the firm that you go to, and depending on the complexity of what you want to put into the will.
I see. Well, I mean, I'm surprised that it actually doesn't cost that much because usually already drawing up a will is about in the range of $400, $500. I mean, for typical middle class kind of assets, you know, not the complex type where there's a lot of overseas property, stocks and shares all around the world. So I think what you suggested is actually very achievable for most Singaporeans. How about, let's talk about the LPA, lasting power attorney, and why is this important?
Well, the lasting power attorney is something that actually the government has been asking people to execute, and that's why they extended the fee waiver from this August to March next year. The fee waiver, so if without the fee waiver, each application would cost an additional $75 in government charges. That has been waived until March next year. What the lasting power of attorney does is that you appoint someone to make decisions on your behalf if one day you lose mental capacity. And these decisions could include personal affairs, such as where you live, who you can connect with, your healthcare decisions. It can also include decisions on your property and the related affairs, so managing your bank accounts or deciding whether or not to sell any residential property. So this is important because increasingly, actually, I have encountered a number of cases where even say someone around in the 20s or 30s, they have parents who may suddenly suffer a stroke, and then they don't have the mental capacity to make any decisions. And if there's no lasting power of attorney, then actually there is no one who is formally appointed to make decisions on the person who suffered the stroke. And then they have to apply to court for them to be appointed as a deputy, and that's often a much more costly exercise. And based on what I have been hearing from some of the clients I've worked with, the quotes can be in the region of $5,000 to about $10,000. So it's certainly a lot more costly than getting the lasting power of an attorney sorted out. So that's certainly something that I would encourage everyone to get sorted out if they can.
Yeah, I think it's good to point it out the purpose of a lasting power attorney. So I mean, if like for example, if I'm a caregiver to somebody with a mental illness, in somebody in the family, and what I would do is I need to speak to that person, and then inform the person that you know, in case you are in you know, there's a breakdown, you know, mental breakdown, and then you need me to make some financial decisions. All right, then that's where I need to bring that person to see a lawyer or a doctor, right? A doctor can also
yes, a doctor can also provide the relevant certificate for what is termed the LPA. Of course, depending on whether that person has already lost such mental capacity to even enter into the LPA, that's going to be a concern if we're talking about those who are not so mentally well. You should at least get some kind of doctor's report to state that the person was mentally sound, able to understand the decisions at the point of executing the LPA. And of course, for those who may be concerned about people making decisions on their behalf, you can be rest assured that the person who you appoint, which is called the donee, under law, he or she is obliged to act in your best interest. So whether it's managing your bank accounts or property, he or she must act in your best interest, or there can be legal implications for the person.
Who will decide whether what is being acted out on is to the best interest of the individual who is at stake?
Well, often life is in shades of gray, right? So
Yeah.
so long as I guess the person who is acting can satisfy if it's being challenged that he has made these decisions in the best interest, that should be sufficient. But of
Who will
course,
challenge? Is it the government institution that is administering the LPA that would?
no, I mean often it has to be someone who comes to raise some issues to get the attention of either the court or the relevant agencies. So, like we were talking about the case of Yang Yin, it was a niece who observed that there was some abuse of the LPA, and that's why she commenced various court proceedings. And arising from some of these court proceedings, then the police also stepped in. The Attorney General's Chambers also stepped in.
I see. Okay, so from what I understand is that this LPA is actually a special form that the government gives to the lawyers or the doctors to fill out together with the caregiver and the person at stake. And then the information will be keyed into this database, right, where the information will be there so that, let's say if you're going to the bank to do some transaction on behalf of the person who is mentally incapacitated, then the banks will be able to verify your identity as the I don't know what you call that, the donee, or sorry, not donee, the executor or something like that.
Well, I mean, maybe just to clarify, actually, the forms can be downloaded as well from the website, government website, but it has to be certified by either a doctor or a lawyer.
Okay, yeah.
And then once the LPA is processed, I understand that you can access a soft copy of it using your SingPass. So this helps make it easier if you need to, I guess, handle a relevant bank account or assist with a property transaction, and you need to show to the government agency that you have the authority to act on behalf of the person involved. And it is recommended actually that the person, the donee who is acting, should get a medical report to say that the donor is lacking mental capacity, and therefore the LPA kicks in, and that's why I can make some of these decisions on behalf of the donor.
Okay, I see. So it's actually quite a simple process, right? So besides this, I guess the main thing is how do we have the conversation with the donor, right? I mean, it's always a family member, right? That family to family member that you need to talk to the person to nominate you as the donor, to nominate you as the donee. All right. So there must be a high degree of trust. All right. So I think a lot of it depends on relationship. Don't know whether you have any tips or not because you know in Singapore, right, it's kind of like it's always sensitive to have this kind of conversation.
I guess meaning talking about what happens when I guess
Let's say if I meet
that
my
happens
mom, and nowadays elderly gets Alzheimer or dementia, so frequently reported about in the newspaper. Like, don't know whether my mom will get angry at me. Are you saying that I'm going to be, So, this one is tricky, man.
I mean, it's certainly not an easy topic to broach, and there will be sensitivities involved. But I think if the loved one can understand that you're doing from the perspective of making sure that everything is in order, I think hopefully they can understand because some of these are important to think about, and if they are are not done, for example, if there's no LPA and a person suddenly has no mental capacity to make various decisions, like I said, the cost of applying for the relevant court order is often much higher compared to the cost of executing the LPA.
Actually, I think that if my mom or my parent that I'm trying to get on the LPA knows the lawyer who is certifying it as well, that will add to the confidence, right? That they want to maybe make sure that I'm not naughty and, you know, give them the best management of their financial decisions. Then actually it's good for them to know the lawyer as well, right? Or the doctor who is going to endorse this LPA application.
Well, yes and no. I think ultimately the most important thing is that whoever the donor appoints, he or she has utmost confidence in the donee, because there's no doctor or lawyer that's going to police the donee. And ultimately, it's only those who are close to the family that can see if anything is happening. So I think it comes down to choosing the right person.
You know what? I'm thinking in my mind as you talk that maybe I should organize a seminar, a Zoom seminar for people who wants to get a will and a trust and an LPA set up, and then have you speak, and then then there will be because in a community there's usually there's this comfortable level of witnesses and people who would want to pay a little bit attention to what's going on in my family, so as to ensure that that somebody's watching, so that there's accountability. I don't know, it kind of like makes you feel like, okay, it's like for my, let's say if I have my mom who is not convinced that she wants an LPA, so then let's do this big. So I tell her, okay, well, I'm going to do this talk, right? And then everybody takes part. And then Benedict is going to share. He's going to be your lawyer, all right? And then we will all do it together, And so that it's not something that is very paiseh thing. I use Singaporean language, paiseh thing, but it's something that is everybody needs to do, because if you don't, you need to apply for if you don't have the LPA, you need to apply to the courts to make financial decisions. Then you're going to spend tens of thousands, right? Like what you said just now. So yeah, and then you have all this group of people sharing together, asking questions. Then you will make the process much more open, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always helpful to have talks to raise awareness of the things to think about in estate planning. Often not something that people think about because it's not the most immediate, and often sometimes people put it off until it's too late. So I think it's certainly helpful to have some of this information out there a bit more so that people then get it done, because yes, there's a cost involved, but it's not an exorbitant cost to get some of this sorted out, and it will certainly save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Yeah, so just want to take the time to remind even Michelle, look at us not just as that we are also like friends and members of the community that also wants to help you with your challenges at home. All right, so Michelle, would you take part in this seminar when we have one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I was wondering also about your LPA. Does the donor have to be donor or donee? Donee have to be a family member? Can be a friend, just a trusted friend.
yes, that's possible.
Okay.
Okay. Wow, this friend must be really very, very trusted. Yeah, it's quite tricky. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I think I've heard it before. And so Okay, Ben, how about any other legal things that we don't know about? Do you have any, have you ever, maybe you would like to share some of your case studies, like, or what your experience in the legal field?
I think we've actually covered quite a number of grounds or legal protections. Of course, there are situations where, for example, a person is already maybe in a vulnerable position. For example, one of the cases that has been on the rise recently is what they call love scams, where vulnerable women meet men on the internet, and actually these men do not actually really love them, but seek to use these women either to get money or sometimes in money laundering activities. That's certainly something that's been on the rise. And of course, for this, I think it's important that those around the lady maybe can know that the police can step in some of these situations, especially if um, there are offences of cheating, for example, being involved in criminal offences being committed. This certainly can be highlighted to the authorities and with a view for the police to step in, conduct investigations, and hopefully put an end to some of this conduct. So I think that's something that's important to highlight as well, because it's certainly something that's on the rise.
So the one thing about this COVID-19 situation is that it kind of like separates people, all right? I mean, social distancing, right? So, and some of these matters are very personal, and so it takes a very close relationship for people to confide in one another on what's going on in their lives, the romantic linkages, and you know, some of these things. So but I think it is good for us, for even for me to like talk about this with friends and bring it up that, you know, we have to be careful, look out for one another. I mean, I sometimes talk about it with my family members. I think read it in the news. It's so frequent, right? I mean, even the police have to stick posters at the lift lobby at my block, in my HDB block. I was like, wow, so in your face already, until the public education have to go right to the lift lobby. And so I think that what you mentioned is very important, that we need to look out for one another. Yeah, so I don't know how to do it, because now we live in such a world where you know, the things, we are not close to one another, right, because of social distancing. On the other hand, we are closer to our devices because we have it on hand. So it's you know, before somebody can know like what's going on in our life, maybe a scam has already happened or money has been transacted. So it's interesting. I think it just takes a lot of education and but to hear it from a lawyer is always different, lah. Right? It's like, wow. I think
I think
you must give more thoughts.
to have an awareness of the potential dangers, because I actually had a case where a lady was so involved with this person from Nigeria, and she assisted the person to transfer monies and all, and she just carried out these instructions because she was in love, and she didn't think that there would be any issues. But subsequently, she had to defend criminal charges that alleged that she had participated in money laundering activities knowingly. So it is important to be aware that you can actually run afoul of the law if you get so deceived. And often the cases that I've come across, the ladies sometimes still keep believing that this is a genuine relationship. It's not easy for them to break out of it. but yet they may not cross the threshold to be labeled as someone who has a mental condition or is not mentally well. So it's this gray area that I think the police and the authorities are increasingly trying to increase awareness of.
Yeah, you know, the thing is that because with internet banking, it's so easy to do a telegraphic transfer nowadays, right? Cross the borders, and it doesn't even feel like a crime to the person involved. You know, they just think that it's like I'm just making a few clicks on my banking app. But the fact is that it is so convenient now with internet banking. It doesn't even feel like a crime. You don't feel like you are like stealing or robbing or murdering, but it just feels like you're just transferring money and on the app, and you don't think of it. But I think this point that you brought up, I think that because of this change in our life with the use of technology in banking, it make it sound like it's more relevant now to have more professional legal advice in more of our life. Like accessing a lawyer no longer becomes something that is for the rich anymore. It becomes like, even if you're Singaporean, you're middle class, you're lower class, whichever strata of society we belong to, we need access to hearing from people like you, right? And also with people like us, like Don and myself, sharing about PPOs and how to apply because of our work experience, Don's work experience as a social worker, to put together a more wholesome kind of perspective to this situation and help people to see that even your romantic relationship is without a community of advisors, without community of people that cares and loves you, it is dangerous, right? I don't know. It seems like because of because of social media, people get exposed to different kind of people. You know, I'm not sure what do you think? It's like, wow, it's like, I mean, life has become more complicated. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think it's always helpful for all members of the public to have access to legal knowledge. And I think I take heart that over the last few years, there's been increasing resources actually. I think right now there are all sorts of websites, like Singapore Legal Guide that gives some basic information on the law. Government has been quite active in trying to promote pro bono legal clinics. So these are some of the avenues that a member of the public can try and get some form of legal assistance, even if they are not able to afford a lawyer for themselves. So I take heart in that. I think it's always important to know the law, and that helps you to, I guess, navigate what you need to navigate in life, in your work, and in all sorts of situations in Singapore.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as much as also it is good for us as the general public to be more legally aware of our rights. I think that I mean, we are also aware that there are also limitations to the law.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the kampong spirit that we were talking about earlier on. Yeah, because just yesterday I was talking to a friend and we were talking about mentors. Yeah, and then we were saying that, hey, when we were young, we were never taught that, we could reach out to people like mentors to give us good advice, So I remember that because Eugene and I had ever gone to a seminar before on parenting and family. Yeah, and the speaker actually introduced this concept of the table of support. Yeah, so basically it is recommended that each person has a table of support. And in this table, you seek out people who can fulfill different roles in your life. So they range from having a mentor. Okay, a mentor can be like a whole life coach. Yeah, helping you in decision making, teaching you about conflict resolution, whichever sphere of work or study you're in. You could have a coach. Coach could be someone that teaches you skills according to your interests or your hobbies. Then you have the other persons identified were people in your inner circle. So these people are like your soulmates, you know, where you can confide in when you have problems. And then there are other roles like a family member whom you are very emotionally intimate with. Yeah, so if you are able to have a very strong table of support, then actually, even if the law can't protect you in certain ways, then at least there are people that you can tap on in this kampong lah, in this, you know, we call it kampong, but table of support, you know, who can come and help you, you know, or help you as a caregiver too. If you have to look after someone who's mentally ill, they can be escorts, you know, they can teach a person skills, you know, help the person to learn how to socialize and things like that. Yeah, so I think that if we are more aware of building this kampong spirit and this community, then really we can actually solve a lot of problems when it comes to mental illness.
Yeah, so then you become the kampong lawyer.
Okay, quite cool, huh?
Yeah. I think it's always helpful to have that beyond just the legal remedies. We all need one another to look out for one another.
Yeah. You know, when we are doing this this series of webinars, Don and I was thinking about having a group of professionals as well as community leaders and friends who would credentialize one another and then help our clients or help people in our community to get through issues, all right, like caring for a family member that has mental illness. Yeah, because it's really not easy for the caregiver alone to take care of somebody with mental illness, right? It is of course mentally tiring, you know. Then you have to deal with caregiving in terms of understanding the medication, the side effects, the psychosis, the mood swings. If there's violence, you have to deal with violence. You have to deal with suicidal thoughts, and there's so many issues, other issues to look into, like the welfare, like the legal protection, the community of friends to speak to the person that you're caring for. It's not easy to deal with it alone. So I'm really glad that you have joined us to share about your perspective, and yeah, so it's not something that that we have to deal with alone. Yeah. So yeah, so I think your work as a lawyer is really important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So before we
yes, it can go down to the kind of detail, how much money to provide per month, etc. Can be stated in the will, or it can be stated in a separate document called the letter of wishes. If you appoint a lawyer, the lawyer will certainly be able to advise you on some of the intricacies, but it's not overly complicated, and I don't want people to be frightened of it. Actually, it's quite common. Most parents who actually